members of the Secretariat, to the public who might be following us on live stream. I am happy to report that this new term of Commission's life, 2026 to 2030, met for the last day and a half to firstly find each other, secondly receive reports from the Secretariat and the Executive Director with respect to the work program underway. And I must say that the discussion was forthright, it was robust, and it was forward-looking. I think as the new Commission, we look forward over the next 5 years to making our mark and giving impetus and impact to South Africa's just transition, which we have reiterated has the dual objective of climate change response, as well as mindful of all the shifts that are taking place in our global and domestic environments to ensure that we position South Africa while we undertake this climate response, that in everything we do, whether it is adaptation and resilience, or whether it is our decarbonization and mitigation objectives, the final test will not only be through the lens of how we've managed our work program. Of course, commissioners coming from a variety of backgrounds, also in their daily lives representing perhaps and being involved with particular sections of South African society, trade-off decisions that need to be made between us as a collective of commissioners. With that, I want to open this first formal quarterly meeting of the new term of the Presidential Climate Commission, and would perhaps, because we are publicly screening, I would ask if commissioners, starting with Commissioner Pukunzi, could very quickly just introduce themselves, but please in 30 seconds.
No, thank you, Deputy Chair. Good afternoon, fellow commissioners, ED and the Secretariat. My name is Kinaleman Pukunzi. I am representing the...
Good afternoon, Youth Commissioner, as a part of the constituents representing the youth.
I have background in environment, biodiversity, climate, circular economy, and a strong interest in
mining law.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ndiema Gadagera. My background is in development finance, and my current work is in the transition of the transport industry to sustainable options.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Queen Neo Mopedi from the Bakwenda Mopedi Kingship in the Free State. I'm an attorney by profession, and I represent community and traditional leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. Have we covered everybody? Very good. I'm Deepak Patel, appointed as Deputy Chairperson of the Presidential Climate Commission. I've been in various categories of function at the Climate Commission for the last 5 years or so, from the very inception. I also have public and private sector experience, both in government and in the private sector in finance. Very good. I'm going to call on the Executive Director to present the Executive Director's report.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Deputy Chair. Whilst we wait for the team to project the ED's report, let me just begin by appreciating the presence of all commissioners and the rich contributions that were made in the strategy session that we've just had. I need a clicker. I think it's that one. Okay. In terms of the ED's report, I'll just briefly cover around 7 key issues. Just a quick update on the transition, commission level transition, just in terms of getting us going as the second term commission or second cohort of commissioners. Where we are with the establishment of the PCC as a Schedule 3 entity, current financial position, and as well as a number of key emerging priorities for consideration by commissioners. So as we sit here, the 2026-30 commission has been fully constituted and now in business. The commissioners were appointed in January, deputy chairperson appointed in February, induction processes were undertaken, and the commission was addressed by the chairperson of the commission, the president, on the 20th of February. We've had a series of working group meetings that culminated into the strategy session that we've just had. So from a secretariat perspective, we can safely say that as of today, we are no longer referring to something called a new commission. We now have a commission that is now, that has hit the ground running really and started its work in earnest. So one of the biggest deliverables that this commission will see through is the formalization and institutionalization of the PCC. The Climate Change Act already pronounces PCC to then be a Schedule 3 entity. So there's 2 sets of work that are currently happening. Firstly, the PCC regulations that are just getting the PCC established and getting all the operational issues sorted. We are now in the processes where, led by the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, the regulations have gone through thorough public participation processes and are now in the intergovernmental processes for approval, and we anticipate that the Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment will sign these regulations into practice by end of June, which then paves a way now for the proper formalization and registration of the entity. This work has been happening in parallel with the entity registration process that is led by National Treasury as well as DPSA, the Department of Public Service and Administration. The business case was developed sometime last year, and GTEC in the National Treasury is currently undertaking the review of that business case, which we anticipate the work will be concluded around April, May, which then goes into the normal Treasury process when the Treasury will establish a committee that looks into entity establishment. So we are quite happy with progress on that piece of work. In terms of the current financial position of the PCC, for the 2025-26 financial year that is about to end, the PCC was funded through a blended sourcing model comprising a certain percentage from government, which is around 23.5 million coming through NEDLEC, and an equal sort of just slightly larger amount coming through donor contributions, which is around 25 million, supporting personnel costs and a number of priority programs. And that is managed both through our fiscal host, which is the Africa Climate Foundation, as well as to a lesser extent through NEDLEC, who is currently our institutional home. Over and above that, there's some in-kind support that is coming through the next financial year, primarily through technical personnel or seconded personnel through a number of key institutions. We are also working on a sizable pipeline of around 10 million that we can account for in the 26-27 financial year to support operations. In terms of just as a summary financial outlook for the 26-27 financial year, the current overall funding envelope, I've already mentioned the different contributions. We are also looking at a further in-kind support in the 27-28 financial year of just slightly over 55 million. For technical personnel, mainly targeted at project support, and most of it that's through the JTFM, Just Transition Finance Mechanism, through the work that we are doing with the DBSA. This significant injection of in-kind support is mainly due to the resources that are coming in through the Just Energy Transition Partnership from the IKI grant component. Overall implications in terms of this overall picture is that we continue to manage our resources in a very prudent manner. So cost containment measures are still very much underway. We really prioritize expenditure quite carefully. Travel budget very constrained, where we need to undertake major travel, most of it funded or sponsored. And we froze a number of key positions, partly, yes, due to financial constraints, but then to the larger extent due to the current business case process, which will see us revising the organizational structure. So where we are making appointments currently, it's mainly up to 12 months contractual appointments in anticipation of the establishment of the entity. So currently, the funding outlook looks a bit positive in the next couple of years. However, we are continuously aggressively fundraising for further programs, especially if we are to undertake rigorous research and evidence-based kind of work. We continue to fundraise and collaborate with like-minded institutions. Let me move on to the next slide. I think, oh, okay. Just a quick summary on HR matters. We have, in terms of staff movements, in the previous quarter, we've appointed an ICCN Africa Regional Lead. ICCN standing for International Climate Councils. We do serve on it. Our COO serves on the International Climate Councils as the deputy or the Global South co-chair. So one of the main aims there is to expand similar structures such as the PCC into the African continent. So there was a need to have a position there. It is funded by the ICCN, but the incumbent is hosted within PCC with a certain percentage of their time allocated towards PCC work. We've also, and that is Reza Cole that we appointed in January this year. We also just appointed a Just Transition Senior Manager, which was vacated last year. We had to also, like I said, in terms of cost containment, we prioritize positions that we get to fill, and Just Transition is a portfolio that we can't leave vacant. And Dr. Notiswa Lebala was then appointed. She was not new to the commission. She was previously the project manager for the Komati transition. So she still continues to do the Komati work and the broader Just Transition functions. In terms of training and staff development, I'm not going to go through all the bullet points, but training and staff development continues as and when we identify it. And for the executives, we do the individual leadership and management coaching, individual coaching exercise, which we are very thankful to NEDLEC for procuring that service for us, such that our executives have one-on-one coaches that coach us through the journey. Work program, 4 key areas: decarbonization, or you might want to call it net zero, adaptation and resilience, just transition, as well as advocacy and communication. There's a number of key programs that are underway, which will be tweaked based on outcomes of the strategy session that just happened in the past 2 days, but this just mainly lists a number of key activities that have been underway. In the interest of time, I won't go through them block by block. Outreach and stakeholder engagements continues. I find that the PCC is quite busy and engaged in terms of hosting, co-hosting, and partnering on quite a number of events. We do make sure that each of those events where we apply ourselves, it's linked to key deliverables. So you would see there where we would have participated in, the Methodist SA environment justice kind of work as part of engaging the faith communities, who is a critical stakeholders, or we would engage at, for example, mining in Daba and provincial, local government levels and all of that. However, we are mindful of the fact that left unchecked, we might end up spending 80% of our time servicing events. So therefore, also moving forward, that's one of the key elements that we plan to just refine a bit. We also entered into an amazing partnership with the United Nations Residence Office in South Africa on broad public campaigns around climate change, SDGs, and just transition. That work has reached maturity now, so we will very soon see a lot of billboards around just transition climate action in different contexts within different provinces, some television, radio, social media campaigns that are being developed through that initiative, all of that funded through the UN office, but with the PCC as a key partner, because outreach and communication remains a key priority for us. I'm almost there. I'm not going to go through these key priorities because we've got an agenda item just on communication later on, but we've done quite a lot in here in terms of interviews and trying to revamp the website that still remains as a key anchor for information dissemination from our side. So in short, Deputy Chair, that is the report as presented. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Executive Director. I'll open up the floor for comments if there are any. Obviously, the rework of some of the work streams will happen aligned to the conversation we as commissioners have had during our strategy session. But if members of the Commission want to make any comments, you're free to do that now. If not, I would like to table this report from the Executive Director as having been presented and noted by the Commission. I am reminded that there were some formal apologies received with respect to this Commission meeting, which I'd like to just also for the record note. The Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, Minister Willie Oukamp, unfortunately could not make it. Neither could the Minister of Agriculture, Minister John Steenhuisen, the Minister of Water and Sanitation, Minister Pemi Majodina, also sent her apologies. And the Director General of the DFFE, Ms. Nomfundo Shabalala, has tendered her apologies, and one commissioner unfortunately had a commitment which did not allow her to be present today, although she was present yesterday, and that is Commissioner Shamini Harrington. We currently have 24 commissioners, and therefore not only quorate, we are a vast majority of the commissioners present here today. We now move into reports from the chairpersons of each one of the working groups of the PCC. Prior to receiving those chairpersons' reports, let me indicate that the inaugural working groups were held in quite a marathon fashion over the last week to ensure that commissioners who are members of each one of those working groups were taken through a quick-fire introduction to the work content as well as the salient points of the activities of each one of the working groups as we came into force as a new commission. I attended each one of those working groups, initially in closed session for commissioners only, in order to work through a process of nominating, appointing, and confirming chairpersons of each of the working groups. So I am pleased to announce that the working group on net zero is chaired now by Joanne Yawich. The working group on adaptation and resilience is chaired by Commissioner Brandon Abdinor. The Commission on Climate Finance is chaired by Shamini Harrington, but I had to step in, and so I will be giving that working group's report. And then, of course, the working group related to monitoring and evaluation, and I was cautioned to actually ensure that learning is also emphasized as one of the areas of activity in that working group is led by Ms. Kungega, Dr. Ntumbi Futi Kumalo. And so there we have it. We're now moving into reports from each of the chairpersons, and I will start with adaptation and resilience. Commissioner Brandon.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. And as you said, it was indeed a quick-fire process, but I think a very useful orientation for commissioners present. So firstly, the Secretariat took us through a review of the work of the first term, as well as a framing of second-term priorities. And we really got a very useful look at how that interacts with the theory of change, and highlighted the increasing integration of research, institutional support, and monitoring and evaluation and learning. The mandate was reiterated, including embedding adaptation into national planning, supporting implementation of the National Adaptation Plan, facilitating partnerships, and mobilizing adaptation finances. Certain of the challenges from the first term are also highlighted, and those include fragmentation, financing constraints, data limitations, and difficulty in demonstrating impacts. We then had the ED address, and she spoke of the geopolitical shifts that we're all aware of and the competing fiscal priorities and how these are expected to constrain international climate finance, particularly for adaptation, which, as we know, has been on the back foot as compared to mitigation. This in turn bringing to the fore the need to strengthen domestic resource mobilization, improve the investability of adaptation interventions, and then also highlighting the priority sectors, which include water, agriculture, and human settlements, but with health also emerging as an additional priority area. The Secretariat then took us through the work program, and we had some good discussion around that, just highlighting the sort of main features being strengthening early warning systems, advancing the climate and health nexus, and we had a good discussion there, recognizing that in this case the initial projects relate to health infrastructure, but in fact there's the broader health issue that needs to be addressed in due course. The development of the Just Adaptation and Resilience Investment Platform, or JARIP, which is going to start setting up an institution that can allow for the financing and for projects. Skills for climate resilient development and adaptation indicators for the PCC's monitoring, evaluation and learning framework. In the discussions, commissioners made input that it would be good to highlight strategic intention and the scope of the work, the key partners and the resourcing, as well as the intended outcomes, making those very clear as we go forward. We then had a very interesting presentation from the National Disaster Management Center, which is undertaking a very extensive and multi-year project around disaster risk management and climate change adaptation strategy. I think we were all really impressed by the depth of it, and also just mindful of the issues that come up in the nature of this work. And yeah, the working group was invited to provide inputs, but commissioners are keen to engage with that more deeply, and we'll be looking at other opportunities to do that. And then finally, we had a technical report that was tabled for approval, and we were taken through that by the Wits professor. This was a UNDP-funded adaptation project, and it looks at the nature of climate adaptive work taking place in communities and considered how such work could be made more visible and viable as recognized learning and employment pathways. These being, for the scope of this project, rangeland and catchment rehabilitation, water security and conservation, climate care and community-based disaster response, and regenerative agriculture. And the idea there is to identify these tasks and these streams of work, map them, and then assess how they can be brought into the more formal labor market and skills development ecosystem. The working group was happy that this report was within scope, that it had delivered on what was intended, and it was approved by the working group. And with that, I thank you, Deputy Chair.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Abdinor. If we can move to the Net Zero Pathways Working Group report. Commissioner Joanne.
Thank you. Thanks, Deputy Chair, and I think thank you to the working group for your, I suppose, confidence in me. I'll do my best to chair this working group in a way that gives due consideration to the requirements of science and to the diverse views that we need to consider in being able to find the ways forward that are informed by that science and the requirements of the country. I think in terms of the way the working group was run, it was largely an opportunity for the incoming commissioners to familiarize themselves with the work, that the body of work that had been done in the working group by the previous commission, and I'll come into a little bit of the detail of that. I'll also reflect a little bit of the opening remarks and strategic framing by the executive director. So most of it was for noting, including an input on the grid study that Stellenbosch University is still carrying out, the work done in the institutional support program that deals with skills development, the work being done for the PCC by GIZ on equipping South Africa's workforce for a just transition, a briefing on where we are with the Komati redevelopment framework. There's one issue that we do need to approve, but I'll come on to that in a minute. So going back to the beginning, I think importantly, the executive director highlighted the increasing interlinkages between climate, energy, and industrial policy in the context of the current both national and geopolitical context. That is really marked by rising energy costs, globally protectionist dynamics, and the policy instruments that are evolving in relation to that. The working group areas really need to consider how decarbonization, energy security, and economic development either are traded off against each other or can reinforce each other. So I think that was an important framing input. And then in terms of the Secretariat's overview of the mitigation program, I think the evidence-based work that has been done over the past few years was highlighted, as was the stakeholder engagement and capacity building, and the way that the work has been taken into informing national policy processes, I think in particular and most recently around the NDC process. So going forward, the Secretariat also highlighted that future work would focus on looking at how mitigation pathways interface with industrial development, spatial planning, and economic policy. And then commissioners, in response to that, commented on the need to pay attention to energy efficiency, strengthen government participation in the modelling work that is undertaken, ensure data integrity, and also consider regional integration. And the Secretariat will include that. In terms of approval, we were given a presentation on a piece of work called the Climate-Informed Economic Development Pathways project, which built on the earlier Net Zero's pathway work, and it focuses on looking at what alternative economic futures we could be looking at in the period between now and 2050. It's a scenario-based piece of work that combines quantitative modeling with stakeholder-informed narratives to look at different global and domestic climate action trajectories. And the key outcome of the project was the identification of common priorities that included, among others, the need for strong state coordination in evolving energy systems, increased fiscal demands, and the growing importance of the interface between climate adaptation and climate mitigation. The Secretariat, in conversation, there was then a question about where it would go, and the Secretariat indicated that the findings of this work would then feed into future prioritization and strategic planning, and the working group chair formally approved the project and its outputs. And we would want to put that to the Commission to endorse that recommendation from the working group. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Joanne. I'm just wondering, procedurally, how do we go through the process of the Commission considering approval of that report?
Just take inputs, or if they feel they need Lebogang or someone to present a summary version before they can say whether or not they are comfortable.
Thank you. In consultation with the ED, what we have decided is that Lebogang should be prepared to present a very summarized and succinct outline of that report after the chairpersons of the working groups have presented their reports for consideration of the Commission for adoption. Is that okay, Lebo? Thank you. The next working group is the Climate Finance Working Group, which I chaired and which will be chaired going forward by Ms. Shamini Harrington. We, as I said, appointed Ms. Harrington, Commissioner Harrington, as the chair of that working group. In our closed session, we reflected on the shifting global context, which I think all of the working groups also did. But in our case, quickly came to the conclusion that what it meant for us was that in a constrained and uncertain climate finance environment, we need to emphasize the growing need to find domestic resources to guide and fund and resource our transition, that we needed to align climate finance with economic growth as well as green industrialization, and we needed to prioritize the development of practical, implementable approaches to whatever pathway choices emerge as the optimized pathways from the Net Zero Working Group. We also reiterated the importance of grounding the Commission's work in credible data, integrated development climate pathways, and a holistic economy-wide perspective that underscored the need to balance climate ambition with economic resilience, adaptation and resilience, and job creation. We supported the notion of continued engagement with stakeholders, particularly key stakeholders in the financial system, and that would include National Treasury, financial institutions, as well as other financially capable partners, and to ensure that we played a role as a Commission in informing, in particular, the investment choices that the private sector, capital and financial market players would make as we undertook the transition to a net zero but resilient economy and society. We received from the Executive Director the emerging priorities for the Commission's next phase with an emphasis that we needed to move from planning and accelerate our role in informing the implementation of just transition through the scaling and deployment of climate finance, advancing green industrialization to support economic diversification, particularly in negatively impacted areas during the transition, and to strengthen our national resilience to climate impacts through just adaptation and resilience investments. We then received from the Secretariat the key areas of work that they were performing, with an emphasis that we needed to ensure that through a process of innovative thinking, we were also either at the forefront of or participating in the development, at least in finance, of novel or innovative financial instruments that would see the successful blended approach that everybody talks about with respect to resourcing our transition. The specific areas of work that were reported back to commissioners to familiarize themselves with the work program already underway included the carbon border adjustment mechanism work that the PCC is involved with. The PCC in its own right did a research on what the impacts would be in partnership with TIPS, as well as participated in the NEDLAC processes, which sought to find a country holistic and unified approach to responding to the carbon border adjustment mechanisms, which in particular from the EU and the UK are scheduled to come into force soon. We looked at the work that is being done with respect to early warning systems and reiterated as a Commission working group that this was absolutely essential given how immediate climate impacts that we have experienced in South Africa, and these range from the KZN floods to the Limpopo floods, as well as the drought that is being experienced in various parts of the country. We needed to have early warning systems that allowed all role players, particularly emergency and disaster response, to be ready when such events happened. But we made the point that this institutional complex that not only does early warning but also emergency response needs to be looked at from an institutional point of view, so that, number one, we do not repeat we do not repeat the work that might be done by partners, and we needed to have an effective way of harmonizing all of the work that is already being done in this area. With respect to a just transition financing mechanism, it has been a PCC endeavor for a number of years, and here essentially there is a seeking of financial partners who would provide through concessional and or equity and risk financing the first tranche of resources that would then enable a scaling up and a leveraging from private sector finance to ensure that just transition projects, either because they do not have an adequate return or they are too small in ticket size, do not get ignored through the financial system as we proceed with the just transition. And as a Commission, we note with appreciation that resources have indeed been mobilized from a donor partner to seed fund such a mechanism hosted at the DBSA, which we believe is the institution that has the capacity to actually do this. With respect to a just adaptation and resilience investment plan, side by side with the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan, we reiterated that there is a need to pay very serious attention to the adoption or the creation of and the implementation of a similar investable plan as it relates to adaptation and resilience, and that it is the JET IP together with the adaptation and resilience investment plan that would then form perhaps the basis for a comprehensive country platform for South Africa that would address all of the just transition elements, not just energy. The Climate Finance Landscape Report is a multi-year project which seeks on an empirical basis, again, with very strict quantitative and qualitative methodology to map the climate finance flows, the first report having been produced in 2019, subsequently 2023, and more recently 2025, is absolutely essential for us to be able to discharge one of the functions of the Presidential Climate Commission, and that is to monitor and track the flow of finance over multi-year periods, which then gives us yet another lens through which to determine whether, in fact, resources are flowing in the direction of our just transition or not. We noted that there are many cross-cutting themes across working group, for example, the Net Zero Working Group to the Climate Finance Working Group, the Adaptation and Resilience Working Group also to the Climate Finance Working Group, and we noted that while we're structured in the form of vertical working groups, we needed to find adequate and appropriate mechanisms to ensure that cross-cutting issues are also handled in an aligned, integrated, and complementary way. With that, we concluded the meeting and look forward to the Climate Finance and Innovation Working Group, in effect playing the role of means of implementation as well as resourcing of the pathways that emerge through our other empirical and scientific research. Thank you. Oh, I'm thanking myself. You see, the deputy chair can be funny sometimes also, although it doesn't look like it. I'm told to frown less. We next go to monitoring and evaluation. Dr. Ngomalo.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Commissioners, on the 20th of March, 2026, the Monitoring and Evaluation Working Group convened, and the meeting was into two parts, comprised of closed and open session. In the open session, we addressed a number of matters. First, it was procedural matters that included the certification of prior minutes. It was also provided with strategic and technical inputs into the M&E portfolio, which included the emerging priorities, system alignment, and also place-based interventions. And then the developmental, fine, okay, I'll leave it. Is that okay? Okay. And then the development also of monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework was presented together with the State of Climate Action Report. Okay. So I'll start off with the governance and procedural matters. The previous working group minutes were noted, and they also confirmed the true and accurate reflection of the meeting by the commissioners that had participated previously. And in setting up the scene and imaging of the M&E priorities, the ED provided strategic input in the context of the working group, and where the ED emphasized the central role of the working group, moving from what previously used to be a policy development to tracking the implementation and the impact of the projects. And also, it was noted the Commission's work would increase, focusing on demonstrating measurable outcomes, particularly in relation to the just energy transition, implementation plan, and the broader climate action. The ED also highlighted the importance of strengthening the MEL system to support evidence-based decision-making, and alongside the integration of integrating mitigation, adaptation, and the just transition dimensions, where you also included the social and economic outcomes. And also the state of the climate action report was noted as a key and increasingly mandatory output, where M&E also plays an important role in supporting climate finance mobilization. Then the Secretariat presented a report of a monitoring and evaluation portfolio overview, where it noted the shift towards implementation and delivery as opposed to what used to be policy development. This was within the context of the fragmented institutional coordination and also data limitation. Now, the priorities for the M&E portfolio was given as strengthening the national systems, including alignment with the DPME, National Treasury, and DFFE, and also to improve the integration of just transition indicators into the government planning processes, whereby where to give progress to date has been partial. Given as an overview also was the place-based interventions, where it was highlighted as the key approach, focusing on what is known as transition hotspots, such as the Komati and eThekwini. I think earlier on we've discussed on those as really place-based interventions, but now we'll be moving forward to some of them as we have recognized and been indicated also by the Limpopo and the Mpumalanga floods, and perhaps we could shift our attention to those transition hotspots. And although the learnings from Komati had limited progress following earlier recommendation was noted, and the key challenges relating to the Komati project were timing, sequencing, and the community engagement. And also in eThekwini, the findings pointed to the disconnect between disaster risk management and the climate systems, alongside the infrastructure enforcement and vulnerability challenges. And so these interventions were noted as important and sources of learning to inform the future work. Also in the working group, the current scope of the working group, there were concerns were raised about the limited success in embedded just transition indicators into the government planning processes, particularly given the importance of the DPME guidance and shaping environmental strategic plans and the annual performance plans. And in response to that, the Secretariat explained that the limited uptake by the department had reflected low awareness and the PCC role and of the implications of the Just Transition Framework, with only limited departmental engagement received at the time. And that is more strategic approach, and that a more strategic approach was now being pursued through the closer engagement with these departments, meaning the DPME, DFFE, National Treasury, and also the JET PMU. And on the issue raised also in the working group was an issue of the rationale of selecting the place-based interventions. And that was clarified that the place-based interventions were guided by the identification of transition hotspots, and that lessons from Komati and eThekwini will inform future work, including upcoming decommissioning process and further consideration by the working group. And then the Secretariat also presented the MEL system and framework. This was presented as a cross-cutting system for collecting and using both quantitative and qualitative information across its work. And also the system combined indicators, surveys, interviews, focus groups, and community engagement that are related to tools that track climate action and just transition outcomes, which informs reporting and also support the learning and the course correction. The system currently was presented to include 53 indicators across the outcomes, impact, and justice dimensions. The system also supports the outputs such as the State of Climate Action Report and ad hoc assessment and the broader peer learning, and that the PCC approach has increasingly emphasized the importance of combining both the quantitative evidence with the direct engagement with the communities, workers, and other affected groups. In the discussions at the working group meeting, the commissioners raised conceptual and practical issues that relates to the MEL system. The commissioners emphasized that public awareness of climate change and just transition concepts should not be overstated, particularly in poor, rural, and marginalized communities, and that the system should continue to reflect lived realities and include those groups more meaningfully. And in response to that, the Secretariat highlighted that the underlying survey findings were drawn from a statistically representative sample, and that shows varying levels of awareness that depends on how the concepts were framed, including the greater recognition of the energy transition than that of the term just transition itself. And the further comments from the commissioners in relation to the MEL were made on the need to communicate the distinct purposes of monitoring, evaluation, and learning more clearly within the overall system, and to clarify the tools and the objectives associated with each. And to those comments, the Secretariat acknowledged that awareness and communication remains the areas that require continued attention. And also they confirmed that the MEL system is intended to serve overlapping but distinct functions, and that further clarification of its conceptual framing could be provided. And so it was noted that this had not been the feature of the first State of the Climate Action Report, but of the working group guidance would be important in shaping the future of the reporting. And the last presentation we had in the M&E working group was the State of the Climate Action Report. This presentation, we provided with an overview of the proposed second State of the Climate Action Report, noting that the first report was launched in 2024 and had been well received, but that there was limited clarity on the uptake of its recommendations. So the second iteration, targeted for development from April 2026 and publication in 2027, is envisaged as a more comprehensive and actionable assessment of climate action and the just transition. So this report will include 4 core components, which are contextual analysis of the socio-political environment, community-level just transition narratives, an assessment of the progress since the first report, and sectoral analysis that examine the key developments, vulnerabilities, and responses. And in presenting the State of the Climate Action Report, the Secretariat further indicated that funding has been secured with key decisions that still need to be confirmed on regarding authorship of the report, resourcing, and project planning, which at some stage will be brought back to the working group for approval. So the discussion that went in the room during the meeting, commissioners emphasized the importance of strengthening the analytical depth and impact of the report. Therefore, it was proposed that the State of the Climate Action Report move beyond the descriptive account to a more diagnostic analysis, which will include targeted inquiry into structural barriers to progress and clearer tracking of the implementation and the influence of the recommendations that were made in the 2024 report. And also by the commissioners, clarity was sought on the regulatory framework that governs the report, including its frequency implications and its implications for the Commission's work group. And so with regards to the regulations, sorry, the Secretariat clarified that the draft regulations envisaged a biannual State of the Climate Action Response report and a more comprehensive 5-year assessment with the report is expected to align across all the requirements. And also the Secretariat responded that the State of the Action Climate Report will build on the first report as a baseline that enables assessment of changes over time and would seek to incorporate emerging priorities, including leakages, with broader monitoring and evaluation work that is done as the review of the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan. And so with presenting those three presentations in the monitoring and evaluation working group, Chair, the Secretariat confirmed that a detailed project report regarding the State of the Climate Action Report would be developed and therefore will be tabled to the working group for consideration and approval at some stage. And so that the working group departed on those comments. Yes, where the Secretariat confirmed that the detailed project and scope of work will be developed for the State of the Climate Action Report. Thank you, Deputy Chair.
Thank you. I take it that we also formally note that working group chairperson's report. The final working group, although it's called a working group, is the Finance and Governance Working Group. That has not met, commissioners, and it has not met largely because protocol that we established requires that that working group be chaired by an external independent person to keep us as commissioners having no conflict as well as not having an influence over issues related to governance, adherence to regulation, and management of risk, both of the transition as well as of the institution. So I do want to say that we have appointed or requested the appointment of some commissioners to serve on that working group. That is going to be reviewed. However, those commissioners who were initially asked to serve on that as commissioners in a round-robin resolution passed a motion that enabled or empowered the Secretariat through due process to seek the committed, passionately committed services of an independent person who would then be appointed as chair of that working group. In the meanwhile, the functions of that Finance and Governance Working Group will be discharged by yours truly, the Deputy Chair. So with that, I assume that that suffices as a report. Dumisani, COO, from the Finance and Governance Working Group, or do you want to say a few words?
A difficult one, Chair. I would have said a few words, but I think you've advanced mainly what we needed to update the commissioners on, which is really that option for getting independent members of that committee, which has been round-robin approved. So we'll proceed in that regard, Chair, and suffice to say that there were no major issues either on the revenue and expenditure part or the donor reporting part, or the performance performance reporting part in terms of our KPIs and KPIs under NETLEC, or broadly then the risk register. So most of our risks remain at medium and low post the mitigation interventions, and therefore in the next working group chair report for the next commission meeting, we will try and squeeze both the Q3 report, which is what we would have covered today, as well as the Q4 sort of annual picture, of this Finance and Governance Committee. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, COO. And I think in front of all commissioners, we are going to commit you as COO as well as the CFO to ensuring that we have yet another annual cycle of clean audit as we approach the end of the financial year. And we thank you for your endeavors in that respect. Colleagues, we were supposed to have a tea break, but I think we're still reeling from a rather sumptuous lunch. So I would request that you allow me to forge ahead and perhaps let you off a little earlier, if that's in order. Could I have someone to move and someone to second for the record? Thank you. We did ask, with respect to the report that was going to be tabled for adoption by the Commission, to have Lebogang on standby. So I would like to insert that item on the agenda at this point. Lebogang, if you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I will just briefly go into the headline issues from, or the highlights from the report, rather. So this project started the beginning of last year, and really what the Commission set out to do was to develop scenarios for climate-informed economic pathways through stakeholder dialogues. The idea was through an intensive stakeholder dialogue, if the various stakeholders that we've spoken to could see themselves in terms of the pathways towards net zero by 2050, or to see themselves in the pathways to 2050, rather. The project does outline the context around the various challenges that face South Africa, that are economic, developmental, as well as institutional, and taking all of this into context with a constrained fiscus. So really what the project helps us to do through scenario analysis and pathways development is help us locate ourselves within a various scenarios with futures leading up to 2050, and to ask ourselves, in terms of the context that we face and the challenges of a constrained fiscus, what should we rather prioritize in terms of that future towards 2050? And I'll explain briefly in terms of the findings. So really the objectives were around exploring, yes, uncertain futures, and doing this in a structured ways towards informing policy and decision making, and to develop a set of no-regret actions and policy recommendations that can guide actions from now onwards, as well as strongly guided an understanding of values of stakeholder engagement input, as well as the potential for capacitation. One of the things that the report does highlight is that the scenarios are stories about the future, really. They are not predictions. But what they do help us do is that they can help us navigate a future towards 2050. And this is really based on data as well as expert knowledge. So the scenarios are heavily informed by the PCC's Net Zero Pathways reports, Net Zero Pathway report. So also anchoring this project around just, yes, the current context, pathways, and as well as scenarios, and how we've thought about sort of the process of developing these scenarios over and above the Net Zero Pathways report, is that we developed a 2x2 matrix. And in that matrix, what we've done on the axes is to look at South Africa's climate ambition vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And again, this is also grounded in another piece of evidence that the PCC will have developed, which was a study done by Cambridge Econometrics, where we didn't just look at the energy models, but we juxtaposed it against economic models so that we could look at what happens to South Africa's GDP vis-a-vis the rest of the world's actions in terms of climate action. So what that then does, and let me just indicate that we followed an iterative process of, yes, doing the modeling exercises, developing the scenarios, but fact-checking this with the stakeholders, because it was important for stakeholders to see themselves, yes, in the scenarios and pathways towards 2050. So really the various scenarios give us a scenario where no one takes action. The second scenario was around South Africa potentially lagging behind while the rest of the world does pursue climate action. The third scenario was around South Africa leading in terms of climate action and the rest of the world lagging behind. And then a scenario, which was the last scenario, where both the world and scenario leads in terms of climate action. And just to indicate that this exercise is not the type of scenario exercise where it forces the participants to choose a scenario, but rather what it helped us to do, having developed the pathways and the no regrets action, it helped us determine what actions are in our best interest, giving a constrained fiscus, do we need to pursue regardless of which scenario we find ourselves, if we were to compare what happens from scenario 1 all the way up to scenario 4. In terms of the pathways development, this was informed by another modeling exercise, again taking and updating the net zero pathways work. But what we then did is, again, with the pathways, going back to stakeholders to understand if we've captured these pathways quite correctly. So what the pathways are is that they tell one story about South Africa in 2030, 2035, 2040, as well as 2050. And for each of the four scenarios, we focus squarely, or let me just say we focus quantitatively on the power sector, transport, liquid and fuels and other energy, environment as well as emissions, as well as the economy. And for what we didn't have qualitative data on, we made qualitative inferences on based on existing literature and experiences from the stakeholders. So what that all culminated in, from the initial scenarios work to the pathways work, were no regret actions across all four scenarios. And what these then show us is that, yes, even though there are distinctions between each scenario or each world that we end up finding ourselves in, reality shows that a combination of characteristics helped to inform the no regret actions. So when it comes to the no regret actions, there were some headlines. So we characterized them according to 4 headline themes, but underneath each were specific actions. So when we look at the first no regret actions, were around the importance of the leadership of government, and what it really focused on is that the transition would involve significant structural change, disruption, and large-scale resource mobilization, which requires strong institutional and government capacity. And underneath that, we looked at a number of actions that are necessary to capacitate and strengthen government institutions. And a lot of them have already come up even in the strategic session around strengthen and resourcing integrated development planning. The next no regret action was around energy supply and demand configurations, which we see in all scenarios would need to evolve. Just painting on the point that, you know, change is inevitable, technological change and falling costs are transforming how economies produce and consume goods and services. And the actions were around the need for coordinated and well-planned reskilling and social support, which are central to the just energy transition. The third headline no regret action was around the theme of the demands on the fiscus, which we see in all scenarios which would increase. And underneath there, the actions included comprehensive review of the fiscal framework, including revenue and expenditure, to develop a package of measures that raise funds more efficiently. And then there was the final no regret action that looked at the fact that regardless of where we find ourselves
fair way of decision making.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. If you look at it, and maybe let me start by apologizing because the document was in the working group pack. It might have been an oversight from us, the Secretariat perspective, to carry it through to main. So it's economic scenarios towards net zero. So we know that South Africa has taken a net zero by 2050 tag futures based on key actions that can be undertaken. So it maps that and how it can then be used, certainly for us, as part of the evidence base to motivate for certain actions towards net zero. It's a piece of evidence base that adds to the greater picture of decision making.
In the participating commissioner role, but I'm learning. Thank you very much for teaching me a few lessons as we proceed. Next up is Blessing Manale, our Chief of Communications and Stakeholder Outreach. I've asked him to keep his input brief to reflect on the conversations that we as a commission have had over the last 2 days and convince us that the stakeholder as well as communications function of the Secretariat is in good hands. Oh, there we go. Blessing, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon once again, and thanks, Deputy Chair and Commissioners. Indeed, the presentation is much more shorter. Commissioners received a presentation, it's in the pack, but it has been updated mainly because of the working groups that were taking place, but also because of the discussion that has taken place between yesterday and today. And that's mainly about the key messaging which might have changed, what are the priorities in terms of substance, because we could not do an airy-fairy messaging document. It has to come out of the substantive presentations. So I'll be fairly quick on the part that you've already seen, but just emphasize things that were being raised. And it's not to try to report on everything that we've raised. I think some matters are literally about making them available, like stakeholder mapping. There is quite a lot of work that is done, but the feedback actually says it can be improved. So we're taking back everything with the spirit that we engaged in over the last 2 days. Where do I point for it to move? Briefly, as I've said, the intention of this presentation is to outline the broad framework for stakeholder and communications engagement, outline what are the emerging key themes and messages, which will obviously be refined, and then the strategic interventions, the top 5 pillars that anchors the strategy. And the last level just outlines mid-term and short-term recommendations and a process, because some of the work here would obviously require a process. Let me, before I actually move into the first element, says that the communications work does not have a working group. And we're trying to, and from the last 2 days, we actually think that we'd need to continue to get some strategic feedback from the commissioners. It's one thing to deploy it to an event, draft your speaking notes, take you to a media inquiry, support you at an event, but ultimately we'd need to get the strategic advice from the communicators in chief, which is the president and the commissioners, then myself in that hierarchy. So the strategic focus of the communication stakeholder engagement must come from that at a strategic level, and we go into operationalization and implementation. What is happening? Down. Okay. Again. And then we've done some theory of change, but that's mainly about why do we communicate, to what end? You know, if we communicate, if we engage, what will we achieve? And we outline things like people will act faster, information will be understood, there'll be buy-in, there'll be trust. So that's basically our theory of change. But it's also in the original pack, so that's why I don't want to go into the detail. So, and then we've done some communication environment, because that's what had come in, and we've used some scientific reports as well as feedback, on the ground feedback. And ICLE did us some stakeholder perspective. The report is available. The Center for Analytics and Behavioral Studies did us some work on social media narratives. And we agree, colleagues, social media might not be available, but you've got 42 million people either with one or that account, 42 million accounts. Is it that TikTok, YouTube, Facebook? But basically it means that you've got 42 million people listening to you through via platforms, and others having multiple platforms. And then the Human Sciences Council research on awareness that was reported, the Ipsos report, particularly on public sector and government, because some of the things we pick up has got nothing to do with the commission. So things like that, but you pick them up in consultations, because, and the report says, if you don't fix this thing, you'll not be able to raise a discussion about the just transition, you know. So it's also about that. And then, of course, the PCC stakeholder perspective, and then the state of climate action report. And then the last analysis came from the media fraternity, which is called the state of the newsroom. And it starts telling you what is happening in the newspapers, what is influencing the editorial policies, why are they covering this, who's paying the adverts and all that. So it gives you a fair sense of almost all other areas. I guess it takes time. And then in addition to that environment, we've done more like a summary of what emerged. The tech people. I'm the communicator, not the tech person. So we have done some also high-level outlook of the communication environment, and I'm left with about 5 minutes after the slide, Deputy Chair, or two. One on the geopolitical outlook. I think that the issue of the U.S., this slide is probably 2 years old, so the environment geopolitically has not necessarily been shifting that much. The energy wars, peace and security, the multilateral system, the issues around critical minerals, COP since the last 3 COPs. But then we've also put on the right the green block. What are the immediate domestic issues? And they're like political contestation, a marked increase in unhappiness. And we've got to say this, towards the last elections, the narrative on climate change went down. And we did an analysis of the GNU as the commission. And is it because we don't have a Green Party, or because climate change issues don't win elections? But we said that the narrative changes depending on the other socio-political environment. It might be because people don't want to listen to that when they don't have food. But generally, we saw a decrease in climate change narrative, and we expect to see it during local government elections, and we're not lobbying anyone to put climate change in their manifesto. But we have seen those things tending to happen in a particular political environment. We've outlined a communications approach that basically says communications must be driven by development approach. So it must be people-centered. What came out of the 1990s is what those of us would remember as the ComTask report, from state propaganda to development communication. That's what we think that the Commission should be abreast with. Where is the communication approach? I think that slide is very critical. There it is, which I've just went through. So it outlines why do we communicate, but it also in the middle says these are the key elements of what our messaging framework should be. It should simplify, provide everyday actions, support all that. So it basically says why must you say the things that you are saying. And then we've started developing an emerging set of key messages, which, and we've done it in such a way that you have got themes which would be high level. So we could pick up about 4 or 5 themes, depending on our work program. And I think that it will be easy to do that. Finance, decarbonization, adaptation. But at the level of, at the bottom of that would be a key messages that would say that we're supporting decarbonization because we've got global commitment. But then at the bottom of that would be a fact sheet that says South Africa is committed to this target. Currently we're meeting this. We would need to do this to meet this target. So it's key messages, themes, supporting statement, and facts and figures. So that would be the hierarchy of your messaging framework. So that would be your key messages at a thematic level. As you could see, of issues around export, so would say, what does trade mean? Domestic market, what does it mean for localization? Investment and finance, what does it mean for public and private sector? So we've tried to cluster them there. But this would change depending on what the commissioners say are the priorities. We don't want to be the only people speaking about EVs and the commission is speaking about something on transport. So we think that those should be refined. And then the next 3 slides I will go through. It's a messaging document. It's a table. We will just circulate it. It basically says, if we are saying climate is an existential threat, what are the 4 things that would say? There is drought, there is floods, it's affecting the economy, it's breaking down social cohesion, it's affecting our health. So that's what we'd be doing, for example, on the, and I'm putting the 2 columns. As I said, the 3rd column would probably have facts and figures, would say, what do we mean by existential threat? That's when we'll do the fact sheet for each of that message. But they'll have to literally be signed through the working groups because they'll be dealing with the specific work, and we'll probably bring it here at a much more concise element rather than a 5-page list of messages, things to say. We have done some key audience segmentation, and at the center of that is that everybody has got access to mobile now. So it's whether they're in government, in public sector, and then the rest of the other things they also get on mobile. So you can listen to radio on your phone, you can watch TV on your phone, you can read the newspaper on your phone, you can have a webinar on your phone, you can have a consult. So ultimately, mobile technology remains at the center of communications. And I'm not speaking of social media, I'm saying mobile. So you're able to reach people where they are. They don't have to come to the commission to get what it says. It can get to them. And then we have outlined the 5 pillars. This is the last 2 slides, Chair. The other one is a thank you. And the pillars are international engagements, and we've outlined how do we do with COP, African Climate Summit. They've already outlined the role of the ICCN. Then multimedia and digital content. We've got to emphasize that our website is now translated into Sepedi and Zulu, the only public sector website in the country. So that's a measure. But the problem is the science translated, because it's one thing to read the website in Zulu or in Sepedi, but the concept is still not simplified. So we're trying to make the translation more contextual rather than just literary. And that's the work we're doing with. I think we've emphasized on multi-stakeholder engagement, on media relations. I think we're doing good. We've got a challenge with the public broadcaster who must say does not come to the party, at least at television level. We work quite a lot with radio, but we'll continue to talk to the public broadcaster about without the money from the commission. So it cannot be about advertising. The same way they did work on education on TV, they must do the same work on just transition on radio. So we're trying to get that into that discussion. And then lastly, Deputy Chair, is the slide on the UN campaign, which is billboards, radio, online, and we have balanced the spend so that even billboards, township mirrors, so that the guy that is painting a good picture can feel like he's doing outdoor, the same way that a major billboard owner will also get the money. So we're balancing traditional outdoor with community outdoor. And then the last two slides are the recommendations which came in early. And then I just wanted to say, from a process point of view, we would love the Commission to go and look into the messaging framework, and the Commission Secretary will circulate it because that's where the actual targets are. This updated presentation would be there, but as you could see, the headline priorities on the left, the work around finalizing content and packaging it, we're coming with what we call a just transition content and info hub. And we're not only speaking digital. We mean that all that thing that is there, people must be able to find them in other platforms. So it can be to support journalists, for somebody that wants to do a business plan at a local level, to a student just trying to know where to find a research subject for that. And then on the extreme right, it is the two last campaigns that the country did on climate action. Very, very difficult, and some of you were there. In Daloye too, we ended up creating something like this with a board. It lost money. Then Save the Future was a campaign to support COP17. After COP17, it died. But South Africa can do good campaigns that are mobilizing, and I've given examples like Zebit in the ZB. We do tourism. So I think that there is space for a communication partnership that is not just about the PCC doing everything. We'll never have the money and the capacity. I meant, you don't need 10 people, a designer, somebody watching, speaking notes. We basically need a network that's taking strategic direction from us. And GCIS and a number of entities, the Salga Communicators Forum I went to, and I've said they must invite me. It's 200 municipal communicators in one room. The water communicators is quite a big group. It's about every water entity meeting every quarter, just their communicators and marketers. So we think that the partnership should be about that network of communicators and just tying and including civil society. Wind Energy Association, a few other industry associations have got quite good, strong communication portfolios that are not just about corporate communication, but actually external looking. Let me finish the commissioners before I dehydrate from my sweaty. Thank you very much. But we have the last slide actually proposes, or is I'm done, or the way forward. But that's what we've already agreed to in the morning.
Thank you, Blessing, for that whirlwind tour of your communications function and orientation. I'm going to open up for comments. But before I do that, is this to inform, educate, and have us note what guides your endeavors, or you want us to adopt or approve something?
Sorry, Chair, briefly before commissioners come in, I want to propose that the communications, the messaging framework be taken back to working groups to go and look into whether it aligns with their priorities, and the Commission gives us a go-ahead to proceed and go and conceptualize this national communication partnership, to go and conceptualize, because it's going to need some resources, trying to put up all campaigns together. It can be up to between 300 and 500,000. So it's not work that we could just assume that we've got resources. We don't want to go and fundraise for non-priorities. So we need approval on taking this into the working group system and then continuing to do a framework for a national communication campaign. The rest of the work, it's what I think commissioners have recommended we should do. Deputy Chair, thanks.
Okay, I'm opening up for comments and questions. Commissioner Councillor Moya.
Thank you so much, Deputy Chair. I just have a question. I see the sectoral focused engagement. I don't see government engagement. This is going to be my consistent point, Deputy Chair. Don't let government off the hook. If we expect all other sectors and stakeholders to do the work, don't leave us behind. I do recommend, for instance, it's easier with local government because we are here. The question then would be, what is it that we immediately from this strat plan and this meeting, we take as part of our feedback to our sector? But what is it that you expect? And I expect it to be more than what you expect from other sectors, because it's government and must take responsibility and must lead. So we're going to need that guidance. So in the spaces where we find ourselves as well, as SALGA, that we are able to pass the message to say, local government can do its part, but what is the role of provincial and national government in relation to that? There's an opportunity with local government, even though I don't think we are there yet, that we are doing consultations for the IDP. We can do it because we are in the room, but what is it that we're passing as the guidance to our peers who will be undergoing the same consultations? And it doesn't only, end with budget and IDP processes. All I'm asking, Deputy Chair, don't let government off the hook. Give us the work so that we can support this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Commissioner. Commissioner Pukunzi?
No, Chair, thanks. I think the Premier's coordinating forums must also be engaged. And key, again, will be your interministerial committee that the President has actually established, because it's been led, if I'm not mistaken, it's been led by, spearheaded by COCTA, and other service delivery ministries are also part of that. So if we can just lobby and make sure that we go into that particular space and agree that the report as per the district, because the district has a role to play, including municipalities, in terms of your climate focus. So those reports, and when they go to the PCF, they then has to find an expression. So I think that's the other thing that we'll have to use. Also, the structures of SALGA in all the provinces, the 9 provinces, SALGA has the PCs, then you've got a National Executive Committee, then you've got the working groups of SALGA, where we invited Mr. Manali to come and make a presentation. But we need to take it further, because the working groups at national level, they report at NEC. Maybe the other thing that one would want to raise in terms of those working groups, the outstanding something that in terms of the APPs of the DFFE MINMEC, is that the State of Environment report has not yet been tabled to SALGA because of many other issues. So that's one thing that is lagging behind, because the intention was that that State of report, climate report would be tabled during the NMA. But we couldn't, because it was during that time when we did not have the minister. So that's the other thing that made us to lag behind. But I'm also going to propose that for us to be able to work speedily, Chair, I am going to propose that we consider establishing a working group for comms, so that we don't come here and raise issues. Comms, a working group must then deal with issues as and when they come here, they come being processed, and we then have to either input on the working group or add any other issue, so that we don't start the debate afresh in the PCC meeting, because it will always have its own issues. So the reports of the working groups are able to guide. So we can also consider that, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Tandile, and then Commissioner Kongeka.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Mr. Manale, and I must say, appreciate definitely the outlay of how you have presented this, particularly the informations hub. I think it's quite extensive what has been done, but I'd also like to ask that we see ways in which we can leverage the existing infrastructure, whether it's public libraries, tertiary institutions, to make that information accessible there. I'd also like to ask, with regards to the reports that have been generated by Ipsos and ICLEI, if those are accessible on the website, or maybe guidance on how we can get access to those to be able to review. But yes, definitely looking forward to engaging more on this issue, and maybe I might second the suggestion made to develop a working group around communications.
Thank you, Commissioner Tandile. Commissioner Kongeka, then Commissioner Boitumelo, and Commissioner Joanne.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks, Blessing. I welcome the engagement with the working groups on crystallizing the messaging, because I do think we have to have a bit of clarity about what are the key messages as well. We want to sort of get out there continuously, and of course those that are targeted at specific segments, we also need to be clear about who are we targeting, etc. And you did your segmentation, but I found that overwhelming in a sense. I think because there's a lot to communicate, and then you have a lot of stakeholders to communicate, then how do you know that you're actually being heard and it's landing? So maybe we need to maybe have those conversations, each one of the working group, and see if what crystallizes out of it. But the other comment I have is around, I think you made a comment, I can't remember how you put it, but made a comment around climate narratives not being visible anymore in the media space, I suppose in the communication space. And my appeal is that we actually open our concept, or rather our concept of climate narrative also be looked at a little bit broader, because ordinary people actually talk about climate through their lived experience. So it will be the fact that they can't find water in the borehole anymore. The borehole the water in the river. It will be about the fisher people going out and not finding the fish where they used to find it. It will be at that, and I was thinking about what the male lead, Yuri, presented us in terms of the framework. Those community engagements, you need to be able to extract these types of narratives from those engagements, and they won't talk about climate in terms of carbon emissions and GHG protocols and all of those things. They'll talk about it in terms of lived experience. So climate for ordinary South African, in fact for everybody, general people, it's about the lived experience part of it. So maybe we need to think a little bit about that and find a way of sort of extracting that information and beginning then to engage and meet people where they are. I think that's my philosophy as well. Meet people where they are about what is this that you are trying to address. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Boitumelo, and then Commissioner Joanne, followed by Commissioner Brandon.
Sure. Thank you very much, Blessing, for your presentation. I think Commissioner Kungeka said a lot of what I was thinking. To meet people where they are, it's going to be very important that we do that. I remember when Lohang was in COSATU, we used to say that we wanted to democratize the language of climate change so that it's easily understandable and accessible. I think the PCC must consciously do that. It must be intentional about doing justice for our people. It's not about translating to an African language. It's really about messaging it and packaging it in a way that's understandable and that has meaning, because translation also loses meaning at times. So let's be careful on that. On your stakeholder and government relations cooperation strategy, in the closed session that we had, you indicated how the just transition concept is from workers. And the one constituency that I'm not seeing there is organized labor. I want you to please be very intentional about speaking to workers, not just having webinars, not inviting them to Johannesburg, going into these regions and actually speaking to membership. COSATU's in the commission, FEDUSA's in the commission. We have former commissioners from the other federations. And because the PCC sits at NETLAC, you have the privilege and the priority to be able to consult with workers that are represented at that level. So I want, I'm pleading with you, Blessing, and your unit to prioritize workers.
Thank you. Commissioner Joanne.
Thank you. You know, there is something that is really worrying me about the conversation, which is that we are giving a lot of instructions to Blessing and implicitly to the Secretariat. But the Secretariat is small and its capacity is limited. And I think that this conversation really begs the question of what is our responsibility as commissioners, and to what extent does the Secretariat support us to be able to go out and do that work. And I think it's we haven't had the conversation about what do we do in the Commission apart from being in a working group. And every quarter we come and we read a document and we say we like it or we don't. I think that I would like to see, particularly on this comms thing, that we function as a team or teams, because each one of us has constituencies and networks and access. And I think with a coherent set of messages and a coherent program around what do we need to consult on, we could all be doing quite a lot more. Because otherwise I think we're going to sit with a lot of expectations that are not really going to go anywhere, and frustration on all of our parts around it. So that's the one point. The second point is I do agree that we need a campaign. I was very privileged. I was in Ndalo year 2 and the COP17 campaign. I think it is something that we would need to conceive of very carefully, because I think there are a whole lot of partners who we would need to bring in. Not only, some of them are partners who would bring money or who have access into the platforms that we need. But some of them, I think, are other organizations that are doing the valuable work, or who have the information or the access that we don't. So I think that it is a very important thing, because I think that without recognizable branding and snappy messaging that people can connect with from where they are, it's very hard to do it. And my last point is, we haven't talked about what it means to be a Section 3A entity. I have spent a lot of my life setting up and running 3A entities, but the one real opportunity that we do have is that it puts you into a much closer interface and interaction with Parliament. And I think in the way that one interacts and interfaces with Parliament is a huge communications opportunity that we should really be looking to use in the most useful way possible. It can either be a kind of bureaucratic reporting kind of set of interactions, or it can be something else. And it seems to me to be the one thing that we didn't talk about was the fact that more and more this commission is going to interface with parliamentarians, and not only necessarily with the national, with the House of Assembly or the NCOP, but also potentially, as was pointed out, with provincial legislatures as well. So I think that's another area of opportunity for us. Thanks.
Thank you. Very, very helpful. Commissioner Brandon and then Commissioner Zainab.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. I was very excited about the awareness campaign and the UN SDG campaign until I saw the presentation, and then a red flag popped up for me. Please, let's not get behind a campaign that disproportionately focuses on individual lifestyle choices, trying to say that individuals are the answer to the climate crisis, when we know that system change, transition away from fossil fuels and so on is. Thank you.
Thank you. Short and sweet. I think noted. Commissioner Zainab?
Thank you, Blessing, and thank you, Brandon, for that. I definitely agree. Just a quick one on the stakeholder mapping. I think that, of course, you haven't listed everyone on the slide, so I understand it's not comprehensive, but just to note that we do need to have a deeper discussion around that. I'm sure some work has been done, and perhaps this will come out in the working groups.
Thank you. If no other comments, I'm going to allow Blessing to perhaps just summarize by way of me testing that he has noted what commissioners have said. Back to you, Blessing.
Yeah. Thanks, Deputy Chair. Briefly, just, and you could see that the presentation was very thin on government relations strategy, actually, because we believe that it's a chapter of our entire engagement strategy. And together with the ED, we had scoped, and we'd actually probably have to communicate that better. We've scoped the entire cluster system, the intergovernmental relations system, the structures created by the Climate Change Act. It's actually a web of integration and consultation. So if we master it well and know where we are going, what we are going to do, we'd actually get a lot out of the government system. I don't think it's just about bilaterals or government listening to what we say. So I think it's a fair point. We'll just have to make sure that we reiterate it in such a way that it's understandable and the commissioners know what we wake up and do every day. That's, of course, in addition to the commissioners then leading the strategic work of engaging with government. And then we agree with Parliament, and actually Parliament, we've identified it as a front of probably much more closer to us. When we go to communities, two portfolio committees already dragged us into Komati positively, not negatively. So we've identified Parliament as a very, very strategic partner for transparency and for all kind of constituency work we do. And we'll just narrate that in terms of action and what beyond the portfolio committee that we report to. And then on the reports, we'll make sure that the reports are available. The ones that we commissioned are available. A few are not available on the website, but we could share. And that's because mainly each time you put somebody's report, all other people say, but also put my report is contributing. So we end up being used as platforms for marketing other products. But on this one specifically, I think we should put them and distribute them. And then we agree fully on labor, and we will do more than just webinars. I don't want to give examples of what we want to do, but I think that will be very practical, very empowering, capacity building, and make sure that from shop floor to Union Secretary General, the just transition, it's communicated there. Then we agree on the climate narratives and the messages, and would make sure. And then on the UN campaign, Brandon, we actually have been fighting with the UN about the kind of message that seems to say South Africans, you are responsible from tires to Prima stove to how you plant your vegetables. And we think that there's got to be some much more higher level accountability on the climate. So we'd actually be crystallizing that campaign to be much more not just one-sided. Thanks, Deputy Chair. I hope that I've proven that I was listening.
Thank you. Thank you for that blessing. 2 points I'd like to, one, reinforce and the other repeat from what Shamila said in an earlier conversation. I think the whole issue of commissioners and their role in engaging either with their own constituencies, or my preference would be directed by our program of work to then be engaging in various constituencies, even if some of those engagements, as you know very well, turn out to be very difficult ones. I don't think we must shy away from commissioners. I'm assuming they volunteer, but if not volunteer, deploy them into difficult areas to, in fact, engage. Because if we can't engage with people, meeting them where they are, then I do not agree with Secretariat members who actually do not have a representative obligation engaging with those constituencies. I think that's a very important principal point to make. And Boitumelo will remember that there was a time where we readily availed ourselves to go into the hornet's nest, for example, where there were, for example, COSATU convened regional, local meetings, and we went there and engaged. Because if we are going to sell the idea that we need to undertake a transition at a pace and scale that makes sense for us, then we must be able to confidently defend that transition. The point that Shamila made, which I think we need to note as well as we move into a formal institutionalized structure from a governance point of view, that we need to ensure that we do not open up either commissioners or the organization to liability and risk by communicating outside of protocol. And so a communications protocol, I really don't want us to bureaucratize this, but some thought to be given to the risks that accompany communication as we move into a much more formally regulated environment. So with that, I think you've taken note. I think between you and the ED, you will also ruminate on the proposal for a working group, and look forward to you coming back with a considered response and or proposal with respect to that. Commissioner Boitumelo, did I see your hand up? Oh, okay.
Thanks.
With that, thank you. Thank you very much, Blessing. Commissioners, you'll be glad that we're now approaching the home stretch. I'm going to slightly change the order of the agenda before discussing any other business, which I hope there is none of. Commission Secretary, you have elegantly in the working groups, is she here?
Yeah.
Taken us through the process of certifying minutes, despite the majority not having been present in those meetings where the minutes were generated. So if you can just talk us through a certification process for good measure and for the record of the last Commission's minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Commissioners. The Commissioners requested in a similar fashion that we followed with the working groups to certify the minutes, whereas these were, they captured the discussions and the decisions that were taken at the working groups of the first term Commission. And in this case, we are requesting the certification rather than the approval of said minutes. For completeness, it is to be noted that said minutes of December 5 had been circulated following said meeting, and they were also included in the pack for your noting. What we are asking for specifically are those commissioners that did attend that meeting on 5 December, which are 5 of them, and I will just list them. The chair will handle the putting them on the spot to request them to certify the minutes. Councillor Kinalimang Pokunzi, Commissioner Joanne Yavich, actually it's 6 because I've noted that the mayor is also in the room, Commissioner Brandon Abdino, Commissioner Boitumelo Mulete, and Commissioner Wahid Hussein, including Mayor Moya as well. All of the register that was included with the minutes also indicates these those commissioners that were at that first cohort, the meeting of the first cohort of commissioners. We are therefore requesting that these minutes be noted as an accurate reflection of that meeting, not for adoption, but rather for certification and noting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Pukunzi.
No, Chair, on the minutes of the 5th of December, because we were there, we will move that they be approved.
Thank you very much. Can someone second that?
Yes.
Third it? Thank you very much. Done. Commission Secretary, sorry.
Second item, Chair, if I may proceed.
Oh, yes, sure.
Yes, so there's a second lot of minutes which are now being tabled for approval by this commission, because those capture the 2 meetings that we held this year, which is not really minutes, it's really a record of meeting. That inception session that we had on the 30th of January, which really helped to orient the commissioners and cover the governance framework of the commission, amongst other things. And then the 20th February session with the President, which marked the substantive commencement of the second term of the commission. We're requesting these also be approved. They were circulated following said meetings and were reviewed internally, again also principally reviewed by the DC as well, and so we're just requesting that these be approved just for the sake of tightening our records. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I did a sanity check and a health check of those minutes. On the basis of that motivation, may I get someone to move and someone to second the adoption of those minutes stroke report emanating from those 2 engagements? Thank you. Do you need noting by name?
Yes, Chair, please.
Okay.
By name, not show of hands.
Moved by Ikosi and seconded by Commissioner Kungeka. Thank you.
Chair.
Thanks very much. With that, we're on the literally last item of the agenda, any other business. Feel free, commissioners, you've had a long 2 days to make 30-second bite-sized remarks. Express your thanks to me for having led this meeting. I'd appreciate that very much. But otherwise, I would like to bring this first formal quarterly commission of this commissioner's term to a close. Thank you. Thank you very much.